Thank you for attending my press release. I will talk about the armed forces and how they ensure the adversity of the community cohesion and the face of democratic change. I'll be talking about three government policies and how it impacts the armed forces. These policy changes change the workforce, human rights policies and the response to national and international events. In this current generation, we are far more tolerant in regards of accepting women and members of the LGBT into the armed forces. In comparison to the United States, in 1993, the US government passed the Legislation Act of the Don't Show, Don't Tell Act. The United States former President Bill Clinton enforced this act. It doesn't prohibit homosexuals and other LGBT members from joining the army and any other armed service in the United States. However, you are not allowed to talk about it, but that act has now been dissolved, and now anyone of any race, ethnicity and sexual orientation is allowed to join the US Armed Forces. Changing the workforce. In 2010, the Equality Act was passed. However, the armed forces are exempt from this policy, despite other protected services following it. This is because the armed forces demands a fit and effective fighting force in order to combat situations around the globe. However, the MOD can no longer discriminate against veterans on the grounds of disability, as it breaches their human rights. Discrimination is prohibited in the armed forces, apart from the exclusion of age and disability, as these factors will massively impact the combat effectiveness of the nation. Human rights policy. In 1998, the Human Rights Act was passed in the United Kingdom within the United Kingdom. Everyone is protected on this legislation, and some main factors of the Human Rights Act lets you defend the rights in the United Kingdom courts and compels public organisations, including the governments, to treat everyone equally and fairly with respect. There are 5 key principles in the Human Rights Act, which is to treat everyone with dignity, fairness, equality, respect and independence. With the war ongoing in the Ukraine, the British government, despite not wanting to be involved in the war, does help the Ukrainian government with supplying weapons and other logistics such as ambulances. One example of the British government supplying the Ukrainians with weapons are NLAWs, which have been used to great success against Russian armoured vehicles and to give the Ukrainians a fighting chance against the belligerent Russian government. It's also been reported that British forces have begun military exercises with NATO counterparts for a potential war in Europe. The British government has condemned the Russian invasion of Ukraine with implications of severe sanctions, which can be seen with the increase of bills and fuel prices in response to the sanctions. The impacts of demographic change in the armed forces. The armed forces in the United Kingdom has seen a change in terms of demographics. 8.6% of UK regular armed forces were comprised of officers, 1,410 active personnel, which 10% were aged over 30 or over, with 90% being under the age of 30. As of 1st of April, there's been an 11% increase within the female representation in the UK regular forces. There's also been a 15.1% increase of female representatives in future reserves. However, there's been an 11.8% of total intake down into combined UK regular forces and future reserves. Evidently, in terms of ethnicity, there's been a 9.2% increase of BAME representatives in the UK regular forces as of 1st of April 2021. That is a 0.4% increase compared to the previous year. However, there's been no change in regards to BAME representatives in the future reserves from the previous year, but being upheld and being the same. Furthermore, an 8% of intake of the total intake of UK regular forces and future reserves in 2020. In closing, the armed forces may face adversity in the future, but will always protect the British way of life and ensuring that they do anything for the best of the nation. And the armed forces reinforces that they will protect anyone that falls in the legislation Act of the Human Rights Act.